Alright, time to make a video. Today we'll be talking about the new Primitive Man album that came out probably a little while by now, since it's been a few weeks, I think, since this album's come out, and I've really waited on it since there's a lot I want to say. Um, I've done reviews of several of the singles, at least the first two that came out for this album. Someone actually commented on my last video, uh, asking me if I was going to do a full review, since I kind of decided to maybe not do one for um, Iron Monkey since it kind of lost my interest. Um, but I'm doing one. Needless to say, I'm doing one because until recently, there had just been an album stream, uh, just one long video of the entire album. And there were a lot of points that I really didn't know what was going on, especially for the last 8 or 9 minutes, which we'll get to in a second. If you've heard the album already, you know what I mean by that. Um, we're going to be getting to that later. But I think I'll start by recapping some of the things I said about the first couple of singles, what I was right about, what I was wrong about, and how my opinion has changed, how the broader context of the album has affected this, and then get on with the rest of the album that I wasn't aware of at that time. So here we go. On the first single, I said how hopefully they would just do more of the same what they've been delivering. Um, and that's really all I wanted at the time. Moving on, I was a little bit disappointed because there was there were points in the next track that I reviewed, uh, Commerce, I believe it was. Yes, Commerce, and the first one was My Will, where it would go from being, your sludgy, like doom type of song, just really down pitched and just savage with the either the really deep vocals or the bitter, piercing howls that cut through the mix of the fuzzy guitars that are also really down tuned and the drums that are just really powerful. And they would move over into like a doom, like doom death or maybe black death type of thing, where they go to faster pace of sort of slightly hoarser howls, for vocals, and faster riffs that are more of like a miasma of not really ambience, but like just sort of, I guess, negative, um, riffs, over the drums, which are faster and more consistent with death metal. Although I will say the drums and the vocals were probably the doomiest or sludgiest, elements of this whole album in the areas when they sort of merged more into like well, I get to that. Because I will say this album did incorporate a lot of elements that I usually associate more with death metal, or like cavern death or doom death. I mean, I guess it is a doom or sludge band, and it's like cavern death, which is basically doom death. So I mean, they didn't bridge too wide of a gap with this one. They just executed it the least adeptly in the song Commerce, which is what really had me dismayed because I hoped that the rest of the album wouldn't be, so inconsistent, going back between what seemed to be two different genres, two similar genres, but albeit still a difference. And my hope was definitely fulfilled. The rest of the songs or albums, the rest of the albums, the rest of the songs in the album were much more adept with the transitions. And throughout, there were also these. I think I'll get this out of the way now because I want to. Anyway, I'll get this out of the way now. There were these short, usually around a minute or less than, tracks of just noise experimentation, similar to a lot of the intros that some of these songs had. I thought that was very interesting. And I will say, I really want to pick up a vinyl of this at some point because, as you're about to see in a few minutes here, all the really good songs and tracks are actually, they would either be on the side B or they'd be on the second LP. I mean, all the bangers are at the end of this album. I mean, it's just how it is, man. But let's get into this. So we've already talked about My Will and Commerce. Now we're going to talk about Victim, which was probably one of the faster songs on this album. And I'm actually just going to real quick on my phone pull up a track list so I can refer to this because I have a lot to say about each individual track. unlike some other albums I reviewed on this channel, um, where I've just sort of had, you know, experiences or just sort of general feelings about some things or another, allow me to just. Um, oh, what's interesting was that the title track, Caustic, was actually one of these sort of sound experimentation tracks. I think that's a little bit odd. Not bad, but it is what it is. Um, and I'm saying I'm just sort of passing the time while I pull up the. Anyway, let's get back into Victim. So definitely, this is where I really started to notice that they were sort of incorporating what I perceive as death metal, and it's not pulling up whatever death metal elements when they started to really come in much better. Song was faster. The lyrics were that higher pitched, harsher type of howls or screams, very animalistic. Although I will say less of that sort of tormented, like sorrow-filled, wild howls that you get with stuff like Iron Monkey, when it's not completely layered with fuzz to make up for the new vocalist, and also stuff like, Meth Drinker, Cough, you get the idea, um, which is more consistent, as I say, with Sludge and Doom. So, moving on to the songs, they weren't released as singles or music videos or what have you. I'm actually going to go a little bit out of order and talk about another track that I didn't think was quite as solid, this being the song Sugar Hole. Very similar to Victim in a lot of ways, shorter than the rest of the tracks that were real standouts. A little bit faster. Still good. I mean, this is a really good album. The only song I really wasn't a big fan of was actually Commerce. But yeah, so getting on to the second half of the album. All right, so before we get on to the second half, I beg your pardon, there is another song that I'm not really going to go into much detail on entitled Sterility, because it didn't really impress me as much as what we're about to get into. And the first of these songs that is really good and really worth your attention is one entitled Tepid. Now, it's funny that it should be called Tepid because it is anything from Tepid. This song is fire, right? This is probably one of the best on the entire album, and probably one of my favorite Primitive Man songs. Now, getting into this song, what's it like? I'm not gonna say it. Anyway, this song, when I said that my will, when I said that my will was fast and aggressive and reminded me a little bit of some Cavern Death, the comparison could not be. I mean, the comparison is much more apt for a song like Tepid. Okay, so to get right into it, the vocals were, and while I've always praised Primitive Man for their vocals, these were quite harsh and also quite fitting. Like it really, sometimes when they would play, their sludge songs, the older stuff on albums escaping me, Scorn, when that would come in, sometimes they would just cut into the mix, and I wouldn't always. It would always sometimes be a bit jarring, which is okay. But with this, the vox and the instrumentals really came together well to be really energetic. And I don't know if I'm looking for energetic on this record. That's what I got with this song, but it's still really amazing. We're getting to some of the longer songs. I think this one might be like 10 minutes and 20 seconds. But and as I hinted at before, the drumming was less I guess predictable, less and sort of less predictable and less like death metal than some of the vocal styles might be, or some of the guitar riffs were. And the guitars were actually really getting into that faster pace, wherein they would just be this miasma of riffs, these really ominous type of riffs just hanging over the drumming, which I said was had a lot more, I guess, like emotion to it. Maybe it was a lot doomier than some death metal, even some cavern death. And I know the riffs and percussion really sounded a lot more natural and came together a lot better than something which is still really good, like Portal, where sometimes I sort of chuckle at how overbearing the riffs and some Portal songs seem when they're trying to go faster and be more in that less like cavern death and more like death metal, and it just seems like they're so like down tuned. It's a little bit comical and I think overbearing seeming, but this really came together well. And let me clarify with these vocals. When I say it sounds like cavern death, it kind of doesn't. In that, when I think of stuff like Antediluvian or Incantation, maybe less Incantation since they were older and less of the. I'm saying cavern death. I'm interchanging cavern death with doom death. If that irritates you, go ahead and correct me, but we'll just keep going. Sometimes the vocals of those bands are so deep that they lose a bit of the texture, and just like sound like there's like each syllable is like it's like a monolith. You really is half seen through this whispery mist of whatever I was smoking to start seeing sounds like this. But the really low and deep syllables will have sort of like a whispery finish to them, and yeah, I compare that to something like the vocals of Primitive Man, which aren't whispery at all and are still a lot comparatively higher pitched than these doom death type of guys. I could compare it to someone like Saboth from Goat Penis, who really does have a lot of great texture to his voice, especially when he sings slower. Well, he's no longer doing that, but when he would go slower on a song like High Temperature Fires from Inhumanization, which I'm actually trying to learn right now. And the first time I did it, I actually got lightheaded, so that's great. But getting back to the point, this is what I mean when I describe the vocals. Now let's get on to Disfigured, and I can only assume they're referring to you after you hear this song. Is once again, this is another fiery, energetic one where I'll say it was a bit slower and a bit sludgier than Tepid. And I swear, I'm falling in the same trap that I do in every video, where I use the same few adjectives and really forget what I want to say. Please forgive me. But I'm gonna try and go through this as best I can because this is another one that really impressed me. And yet I can't find the words to really go in and just talk about it. This is really irritating me. Okay, so I'll wrap Disfigured up by saying in a lot of ways similar to Tepid, except some of the things they did with the vocals were a lot more harsh and sort of have that like gut-rending type of feel that some sludge bands have. And I'm actually kind of getting a little bit irritated with myself that I can't think of the right words. But let's get on to Inevitable, because Inevitable did some really cool stuff. Now you see how in the title, well, it's called Inevitable, as in how your time will come or something like that. Towards the end of the song, they actually started doing this thing with the drums where, now to reference Portal again, the song, it was Omega Curtain, I believe. There was that bit at the beginning with the drum beats. They were like the pendulum of a clock, and there was the guy swinging back and forth. Anyway, in the video, but this sounds a bit like a timer clicking down, where it's like, and if you're hearing that sound at all, it's a lot more high pitched than it was in the song, because like I said, the snares are still tuned pretty low because it's still really, really deep. That was going in there, in with the noise experimentation, and I will say at the beginning of this song as well, and at the beginning of a lot of these songs, there's some noise experimentation with the guitars, and that's mainly how they do it, it's by using their guitars. Same thing with all the what I called noise tracks earlier, which are actually just instrumental tracks, but there still is a lot of fuzz and a lot of shrieking and all kinds of good stuff on those tracks. I still think it's funny how the title track is one of those. They must be really moving in that direction, as we will see in just a moment. Now this one was even, I'd say on the whole, slower than Disfigured, which I'm really irritated that I wasn't able to get to in as great of detail for this video, for whatever reason, and Tepid. I think the main standout was how they started working in percussion with their intros, which also sounded like Omega Curtain. It is more comparable since it was in the intro. At that point, and that's actually what I was going to say about Disfigured, is they really kicked in, going in on that type of combining death metal into their sound, at least in my opinion. And they started blending much better than with Commerce. So that's what I would have said about Disfigured, and that's what I'm going to say. Now, we get to the final track. Now this is something called Absolutes. Now this is another. It doesn't seem to be an instrumental track quite like the others. First of all, it's almost 9 minutes long, and this is some pretty experimental type of music here. It starts off, and what I assumed would be the intro of another type of sludgy and increasingly death metal influenced track, and I thought I would really enjoy it. It starts off sounding as if it sounds like you can hear the musicians filing up to their mics or their guitars and start tuning them. It sounds like a soundtrack. I'm like, okay, this is odd. They've decided to actually just use an unrendered sound check as an intro. Very odd. And then I noticed they were only making the same sounds over and over again, and they didn't quite sound like guitars being tuned at this point either. There was one little bit they would repeat with some high-pitched notes where it sounded like a little bit of what used to be upbeat a harmonica riff just being repeated slowly and forlornly on the breeze, because it'd fade in and out of being half heard. And then on top of that, there'd be a higher, less intricate, or higher in volume, I mean, type of repeated sound that I could also attribute to guitars. It sounds like, back when you were a kid, you would go to a playground and you'd be on the swings, and sometimes the swings weren't always nice. It'd just be some long rusted metal chains where it's not really, it's surface rust, but it's been worn down by the hands of it's just brown steel, and the seat beneath you is just some hard cracked black rubber, and you'd be swinging and you just hear this high-pitched squeaking, which every time you heard it would really just catch at you. I'm talking about as a child, and you think, wow, this swing's about to break and I'm about to just fall. Wouldn't be that much of a fall, but I mean, you were still afraid of it at the time. This is kind of the sound that was repeating throughout the song. And like I said, the last couple of tracks were a lot less, were a lot more energetic and a lot more exciting, less sorrowful, like the sludge is supposed to be. Well, this amply makes up for that. And at some point, they start to do like just playing singular notes on the guitars that are clearly identifiable as being played on the guitar. It reminds me a great deal of the, incidentally, Drone Doom's, or song by the Drone Doom project, Khanate, which is the people from Sun and Burning Witch, I believe. I can't think. No. We'll just say, I don't remember what the other band is, but it's basically the same people. They have this track called Wings from Spine that at one point, and it's still a really spooky track, in a lot of ways spooks me a little bit more than something like KFR or No Other Tongues does. And I'm going to get to No Other Tongues in a second here. No. We're going to go back to No Other Tongues in a second. This is getting filmed out of sequence. I don't care at this point. I just remember what I was going to say about disfigured. You just wait. Now, getting back to as I say, there just be like these singular notes that really snap you out of the sort of trance you were going into from hearing these squeakings, like this squeakings and squealings and half heard mournful whatever the hell noises it was. And this is all over some relatively thick type of fuzz. Um, and this goes on for a minute after minute, and it keeps just building up on you, and you're like, what is going on? This is why I said if you listen to the album stream, you probably didn't really know what was going on for a while there until you get to the end. The last couple of minutes, just the noisiest, fuzziest, slowest, sludgiest guitar riff you've ever heard starts playing. And I'll tell you, I tried to do like sludge drone one time, and I didn't know what I was doing on the guitar. And I was borrowing the guitar, and I had to return it to the owner after right the day before I was about to record. After I'd spent like a whole month figuring out what I was doing, playing some really stupid simple riffs. But as I say, this riff starts playing, and there's the fuzz and the going back to the whispery hazes over the monoliths or whatever. As I said earlier in the video, there's that, but there's also this high pitched crackling type of fuzz as well that really has just this really negative feeling to it. Like you listen to it and you're like, it was so sort of like foreboding, and I don't want to say mournful again because I've said that so many times. And I know those words aren't interchangeable, but there's a lot of ways to describe this stuff. That comes in at the very end. Um, and then eventually the track kind of winds down from there and ends, and you're just left like wondering, what did I just listen to? No vocals, limited instrumentals, lots of noise that you've never really heard before. And that's how the album concludes. I'd say it works fantastically because it leaves you feeling the way you should have been feeling throughout the whole album, while still giving you those really energetic, much more energetic, aggressive, um, like pessimistic songs where they're just screaming their aggression to the world, which is what they say they do whenever they record. Now let me get back to what I was saying about Now Their Tongues. This is what I forgot when talking about the song Disfigured. Towards the end, there's this bit where sort of like this long note, like vocal note. It sounds like a chant where it's like ooh type of thing. And similar to the song Nihilism Tied Up in Burning by Now Their Tongues. Really good song, by the way. Now on that song, this kind of gets you into this nice feeling of, climax and satisfaction and not really euphoria after the chaos and the terror of the song before. With this song, there's once again fuzz on the song, and it gets you sort of feeling like what's going to come next. And what came next was Inevitable, which is a great song with a great motif they had with the percussion that they worked into their sound experimentation, which is very exciting. That's what I would have said about Disfigured early on in this video. I'm probably just going to string these clips together without too much editing so you can get an idea of why it's so out of sequence. But yeah, that is my review of the Caustic album by Primitive Man. And I'm definitely going to have to get this on vinyl because if I do, when I do, it's the second LP that I'm going to be spinning a majority of the time. So, if you liked my review, if you'd like to contribute to my review, or add something new, drop a comment below. If there's something that I made a mistake on, you'd like to correct me, go ahead and do that as well. I know I threw around a lot of terms today that some people might define differently. And hey, if you liked my delivery, if you liked my topic, go ahead. Think about leaving a like, think about subscribing. Definitely check out some of my other videos. And this sort of long break I've been taking between making videos every so often is coming to an end. I've got one I'm going to be dropping tomorrow. That's going to be about all. See you in the next one.